Ladies and gentlemen, let's get into the video. I've been messaged several times recently by viewers asking my opinion regarding the PlayStation 4 Neo and the Scorpio. Specifically, can Sony, if they desired to, increase the performance of the Neo to be more in line with what Microsoft are boasting that the Scorpio is capable of? Now, a couple of small caveats before we proceed. The first is that I'm recording this mid-June 2016, so as of the time I'm recording this, we don't know all of the information regarding the configuration of the Neo or Scorpion, specifically on the GPU or also the types of CPU that the systems are using. And secondly, because we don't know either the release date of either system, and we also don't know the pricing of either system, it makes it a bit trickier. So for example, if Neo is coming out, let's say for the sake of argument, March 2017, and Scorpio is being released holidays, let's say late November 2017, and Scorpio is going to cost $500 and the Neo is going to cost $350 or $400, it's going to be a lot trickier for Sony to be able to compete performance-wise. Anyway, with those little caveats out of the way, let's talk about this, shall we? So I guess when you're talking about performance, you can boil it down to three particular criteria. 1, memory, 2, CPU, and 3, the final one, is GPU. There are other components, of course, which go in towards a system. For example, you could talk about the speed of the Blu-ray drive and other bits and bobs, but for this, we specifically want to focus on these three key aspects. Now, I am working on a full Scorpio analysis in the background, which goes into a lot more of these details regarding the Scorpio side of things and how it's probably being put together and the components inside of it. But specifically in this video, I want to primarily come at it from the angle of Sony, but it's supposedly using 36 compute units, which means a total of 2,304 shaders, which is the same configuration as the Polaris 10 RX 480 GPU. Supposedly that's running at 911 MHz, which puts out about 4.2 T-flops of computing performance, which is pretty impressive. It's getting to about 2.28-ish times that of the vanilla PS4. The CPU is running at 2.1 GHz. Supposedly it's very similar to the current CPU, so let's say for the sake of this video it's an AMD Jaguar or perhaps the Puma. And finally, it's using up-clocked memory, so same memory type, same memory configuration, it's just faster than the vanilla PS4, and that's putting out about 218 GB per second of memory bandwidth. The easiest way Sony could increase the performance of the system would be to simply increase the speed that the GPU, the CPU, the memory, what have you, run. So for the sake of argument, running the Neo with the same GPU configuration at 970 MHz pushes the performance to about 4.47 T-flops. If one was to push that up to 1050 MHz, you're looking at about 4.83 T-flops, which is quite a bit more. It's around 600 G-flops higher than the current Neo specifications, but falls far below what the 60 flops of the Xbox Scorpio is capable of. Now, we do know from leaks and from images that have popped up onto the internet that the full configuration of the Polaris 10 RX 480 is capable of running at around 1266 MHz, which puts it just shy of what the Scorpio is, which leads me, and this is part of a much larger discussion, which leads me to believe that it's either using a slightly different custom configuration SoC or GPU, or that it's running at much higher clock speeds. Now, the problem is when you start running things at really high clock speeds, it starts to generate a lot of heat. So there's a good chance that Sony won't really want to push the power envelope much higher, especially if it still wants to go to a fairly small case and to keep prices down, because bottom line is, if, for example, they had figured a 911 MHz, and I'm just pulling numbers out here, I don't know what their actual yields will be on this machine, they've probably done some projections, but let's say that at those speeds, 1 in every 50 of the SoCs, of the components is not capable of running at that speed. So in short, 49 are good, 1 goes in the trash. then they can perhaps say, okay, that's pretty acceptable in terms of losses. But if they start gaining to like 1000 megahertz, 1050, it could be that those figures start to become 2 out of every 50, or 3 in every 50, and therefore they might start thinking twice, and it would start increasing the price of the machine so that they can essentially make profits on it. Could they change the GPU configuration? Possibly. It's possible, for example, that the system that they've produced, the stock they've produced, does have 40 compute units, and they've disabled 4 for the purposes of yields, so they could perhaps enable 38 rather than 36. But I would imagine that that would be more costly in terms of yields, and I'm going to also assume that they are using a variant of Polaris 10. That's what the current rumours are, but based upon pure speculation. Whether that's true or not, it remains to be seen. Regarding the CPU performance, we do know that the Jaguar is already being pretty much maxed out, regarding the 2.1 GHz. Now, we can only speculate what the Scorpio is using, but it's definitely possible that Sony could decide to increase the clock speeds a little more, especially if they are indeed using Puma. Puma has a reported maximum clock speed of around 2.5 GHz, with some desktop models running at around the 2.4 GHz mark. It's once again up to Sony, and if they want to start taking risks regarding yields, to say run it at 2150 or 2200 MHz, they could certainly do that if they feel confident, if they feel that AMD's manufacturing is refined enough. Finally, memory. So there's 2 ways you can tackle memory. First is quantity, and second is speed. In terms of speed, we know that the bus is putting out around 218 gigabytes per second, and by we know, I mean someone's whispered it in someone's ear and it's leaked out to the internet, so whether that turns out to be true or not, you can make your own decision. Which means that the GPU on a 256-bit memory bus, which is the most likely configuration, is running at 6800 megahertz. The other possibility is it could be 5500 MHz on a 320-bit bus, but that's very unlikely. It would just add a ton of complexity for very little gain, and we know it's not running on a 384-bit bus because that would just be ridiculous, and we know that most likely that's what Scorpio is using. Could Sony decide to increase the clock speed a little more? Well, they could go for 7000 MHz. It's not like they can't get the DIMMs, but once again, they probably are getting a good deal on 6800 MHz, because essentially you could have 7000 MHz DIMMs which don't quite run to snuff, but are perfect for the PS4K. This brings us to size matters. Now, from what we understand about the Scorpio, it uses, has 12 gigabytes of GDDR5 memory. The PlayStation 4 Neo, once again, supposedly, according to the leaks, has 8 gigabytes still, although it does have an additional 512 megabytes dedicated from the operating system available to games. At least that's what the rumours are. Could Sony, if they so desired, add more memory to the Neo? Well, the answer is yes, but it depends if they want to take the financial hit. So, for example, Samsung, I believe it was some point early last year, they started mass production of 1 gigabyte GDDR5 chips, and their own press statement was, and I quote, "We expect that our 8 GB GDDR5 will provide original equipment manufacturers, also known as OEMs, with the best graphics memory solution available for games consoles as well as general use notebook PCs." And that was according to Ju Sun Choi, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, probably not, Executive Vice President of Memory Sales and Marketing at Samsung. Now, just for your FYI, according to various PlayStation 4 teardowns, and there's so many of them available on the internet, the PS4 uses 512 megabyte GDDR5 chips from Samsung. In short, what I'm basically saying is that Sony could either opt to use 8 of those 1 GB chips for cost reduction, or they could still use 16 and get 16 gigabytes in, most likely. Would they want to do that? Would they want to incur the extra cost? It probably depends on what type of bargain basement deal they can get from Samsung. Obviously, additional memory would help. Would the PS4K actually need that extra performance or extra memory given the GPU? It's debatable. It really is. So yeah, I guess what I'm saying in a roundabout way is that Sony could certainly start closing the gap from the PS4K to the Scorpio. The question isn't whether they could close the gap with an upclock, it's whether they would want to essentially scrap a lot of the design choices they've already made until this point and go back quite a lot through the drawing board and basically use a much larger GPU configuration, or risk really low yields by going very high clock speeds. The answer is possibly. I mean, I guess they haven't formally announced a release date, so they could, if they really wanted to, that the console slipped to 2018 if they really desired. But would they want to do that? Probably not, to be honest. My personal opinion on this is that they might decide to go for a subtle upclock. They might decide to go for, say, 950, 960, 970 megahertz GPU. They might decide to do that. Whether they will decide to do that or just keep it as is, it remains to be seen. They might decide, hey, you know what? Okay, well, we're going to just have a pricing differential. We're going to sell the original PS4, and I'm just throwing numbers out there, $199 US, maybe a cost-reduced model. We're going to sell the PS4K at $270 US, once again, just throwing numbers out there. And Scorpio could be $450 US. That's what they might decide to do. We just don't know. But given what we know about the system at the moment, the Xbox Scorpio is quite a bit faster. Is the Scorpio a revolution? Is it going to be capable of 4K gaming natively with all games? No, it just doesn't have the performance, even at 6 T-flops. For example, the Fury Nano is faster than the Scorpio, but quite a bit, and it's not capable of 4K gaming at 60 frames a second, and it often dips to 30 frames a second-ish with a lot of games, and that's like, you know, 2015, 2016 technology. So in 2017, late 2017, there's probably a reason that Phil Spencer has said, yeah, developers can use the performance however they'd like, and I think that's going to be very similar to Sony. They're not going to impose a resolution restriction. It's more, hey, if you want to do X, you can do X. If you want to do Y, you can do Y. You can use the power however you want. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'm trying to keep this one fairly succinct. It says it's already 13-ish minutes long. But hopefully you've enjoyed it. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.